InCommon's Future Get In on the Discussion, our monthly webinar series focused on identity and access management. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator. But first, just a couple of reminders to make you all aware of. This event is being recorded, and the recording, along with the slides, will be posted to the IAM Online website. In addition, if you register for this event, you will automatically receive a follow-up email that has a link to both the slides and the recording for the webinar. We're going to hold questions until the end of the presentation, but please post them in Zoom using the Q&A function. Once again, we're going to be using Zoom for the Q&A function, for questions, the Zoom Q&A function. The chat area is certainly available to you for posting comments, but if you can, we'd appreciate you posting those questions using the Q&A function. Once again, we are recording the webinar, and you will receive a link to that. It'll also be posted on our website and on our YouTube channel soon. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the virtual podium over to your moderator for this afternoon, Kevin Maroney, Vice President, Trust and Identity and NetPlus for Internet 2.
Fantastic. Thanks, April. And thanks to all of you who've joined us, and I'm sure others will be coming along. As April said, my name's Kevin, and I do Trust and Identity and NetPlus Cloud Services things at Internet 2. And if we could move to the next slide, I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion with Ann West, who's a colleague of mine at Internet 2. She's the Associate Vice President for Trust and Identity Services, also serves as the Executive Director of InCommon, and is also a member of the InCommon Steering Committee. I'm also joined by Mark Wallman, who's the Vice President and Chief Information Officer at North Dakota State University. And the other special part of Mark's hats today is Mark currently serves as the chair of the InCommon Steering Committee, which is the sort of the overall advisory and governance body for all things InCommon. The good-looking people are to my right and left here. And when I first saw this picture, it kind of looked like a reunion of the stunt doubles from Princess Bride. But we were delighted to be together last week at Internet 2's Community Exchange to deliver this presentation together. And we're fortunate to have another opportunity to share what's happening about InCommon Futures 2. Next slide, please. So the structure of today's talk is going to be in 3 big chapters, the past, the present, and future. And we'll kick us off here in just a moment. And if the timing works similarly to last week when we did this live in Atlanta, Georgia, there will be plenty of time for questions, for me to help field your questions for both Ann and Mark. So please, as April had reminded you, we'll be using the Q&A function in Zoom to field those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann to get the story started. Ann?
Great, Kevin, thanks. And I don't really want to ask who is whom's stunt double, because I don't know, I think that'd be pretty embarrassing. So let me continue on with the slides. So I want to kind of bring you up to date and kind of give you a little bit of background on what InCommon Futures 2 is, kind of where we have been, a little bit of present, and then I will hand it off to Mark for the future. So InCommon Futures 2 is really an activity that Internet 2 is conducting with the InCommon Steering Committee. And in fact, came out of the InCommon Steering Committee's discussions last year around the changes that have been kind of accelerated during the years we've had during these pandemic years, and the changes that we're seeing in the community, and needing to kind of revisit essentially InCommon and where we are and where we need to go. So as a reminder, when we say InCommon, it's multiple different things. So there's InCommon Federation, it's an access framework to enable access across organizational domain, use in particular in the research side, but also in the enterprise side, for enabling access, work, and collaboration. It's also a suite of tools. You think of the InCommon Trusted Access Platform, which enables you to manage identity at an enterprise level or a research project level. You also think of it as a community. We have over 1,000 organizations in the InCommon community, which is even more and more thousands of people that we work with on an annual basis to do the work to help you do the work that you need to do. And then finally, it's an organization. I like to think of InCommon as like a trust and identity brand of Internet 2, but technically we are a separate LLC. I'll talk a little bit about why that is the case. Not that that's really important, but it also is probably useful for this context. So in terms of what we actually provide, what are the services provide, certainly the InCommon Federation, the access framework to enable inter-domain work together. There's a community development, the engagement that we do with our TechX, our base camps, our camp and advanced camp meetings. There's Eduroam, which you may be familiar with, global access to roaming, a trusted access platform, the software that I mentioned. We have an InCommon Academy, which provides education and consulting for how to accelerate and help you do identity or support identity and access management in the way your institution or your organization needs it. And then finally, the InCommon Certificate Services enables essentially securing all of that under the hood. So who is on the InCommon Steering Committee that we're talking about now, that we're working with on the InCommon Futures 2? It's a great list of folks from a diverse number of organizations, including corporate, federal government, and higher education. So we're really, as well as the regional networks, really excited about this group and working really closely with them on this project. So I just threw this slide in. If you don't, fortunately, there will be no test at this end of this webinar, but this just shows the complexity and the richness, really, of the discussion that we have on a monthly basis with all of our community groups. All of those, in some way, report out through steering, and steering, in many cases, serves as our program advisory group looking across the trust and identity space. So when you're thinking about InCommon Steering, think of them as a culmination of a number of different discussions in multiple different places that all feed up into what Mark will be talking with us about. So I've been working with Internet 2 for Internet 2 since 2001, so I can say lots of things about this past, but I will try and scope what I have to say. So the first thing I want to do an introduction is kind of like the last time we did some planning like this, and it was when Bitcoin just started out and we had our first pandemic in 40 years, H1N1 swine flu. So any thoughts? I'm just gonna kind of put it out there. Any questions about or any ideas about what year this is? And I'll give you another clue. It's when Obama was inaugurated for the first time, not the second time. And yes, it's 2009. So the last time we engaged the community around some planning for InCommon was in 2009. And we created, actually, it was again driven by the InCommon Steering Committee, drove essentially a review of where InCommon was and what it needed to do to essentially achieve the promise that I think the steering committee saw in particular at that point was primarily the InCommon Federation. So this is just a screenshot of the table of contents, the first part of the table of contents. Fortunately, we have on this call, in this webinar, someone who actually helped drafted that, and that was Kevin Rooney. And I believe he was co-chair with Jack Seuss during this time. So we can talk about the past and the future when you get down to your questions. So the InCommon Future Group at that point, here are all of those folks. And you'll notice that Kevin, yes, he was in InCommon Steering. Lois Brooks was on the, Richard Katz. There's a number of folks that you may remember or may not remember. But just to give you an idea of the diversity again of the individuals there. And at that point, we had 171 InCommon participants. So yeah, pretty good, not bad for 2009. And while this is a bit of an eye chart, although I think it works better in Zoom because you can actually sort of read these things, these were the actual recommendations from the 2009 InCommon Futures Report. And you'll notice, scan down here, it's really around maturation, it's around development, it's around including additional key service providers. You'll notice with the federal government on the top left side, and it's about assurance, bronze and silver assurance profiles. So it's about growing, it's about business maturation, and it's about increasing the return on investment and richness in terms of providing additional policy spaces like assurance layers on top of InCommon Federation. So Kevin and I did a quick back of the napkin, how do we do? And we didn't do too badly around the requirements in that report card. Actually, we did pretty well. And a number of things like the InCommon assurance program actually has spun up since then and spun down because the federal government has moved on in different places. And we have new standards in the assurance side that actually are much more pragmatic than National Institutes of Health have adopted. So interesting to actually, in retrospect, look at all of these items. So what is the real context of the 2009 report? I think the audience was really the Internet 2 organization and the Board of Trustees. At that point, InCommon Federation in particular was a very new thing. This was before Google, it was before Facebook, and it was really just starting up. And there was some concern that this might pose additional risk to Internet 2 that the board may not have wanted to take on. And so hence the separate LLC. So you can see InCommon was, I would say, in people's minds, more separate from Internet 2 than it actually is today. And that's actually really good. It shows the success and it shows the usefulness of that infrastructure. So we wanted it, the community, Common Steering wanted it to scale from 171 to, I don't know, a lot more. And so it was really as much a charge to the Internet 2 organization as it was to the InCommon, the Internet 2 staff that worked on InCommon. So let's look at the present. Right now, Internet 2 is conducting a 5-year roadmap activity and has interviewed over 500 individuals to gather needs and feedback around our existing services. So that that feedback has been gathered and it has been distilled down into roughly 50, I believe, 50 or so recommendations that are now being distilled by Internet 2. We had a report out last week in Community Exchange around what y'all have told us writ large around what Internet 2 is doing. So next steps for that are some refinement, categorization, prioritization, and look forward to seeing more of that. This and the information that you gave us through this process, we are using to then factor into the Futures 2 process. So if you gave us information, if you provided and participated in this 5-year roadmap activity, that's awesome. We have all of your comments. And I think the Futures 2 piece that InCommon wants to do is going to be a little bit different. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit slightly differently around kind of what is different now. So we've gone through, we're doing this roadmap now with Internet 2. You got a sense of what the original planning was about. So what's different now? Why now? First thing is the landscape has changed a ton since 2009. So Internet 2 and the trust and identity space, our rule has always been, and our thought has always been, we don't want to compete with vendors. We don't compete with vendors. We are here to essentially fill the gaps, kind of figure out where's the sweet spot of need that the vendors aren't really touching. I think one could probably say an International Trust Federation is one of those things. And then what is it that we can do to sort of address those things and work with organizations to figure out what do they do, what do we do, and then fill that gap. So that's, I remember in 2009, I think Oracle Identity Manager, that was Sun Identity Manager. Before that, that was still sort of in play. Maybe people were coming out of that. Tier, for those of you who know about that, hadn't even started then. So now we are seeing these quite a few identity and access management writ large kind of companies. So they kind of come and support various pieces of it. They are getting huge amounts of money to essentially spin up and run the company. So I just threw in a few of these. This is a slide, and the next slide was developed by Steve Zoppi, who is our AVP for Services Integration and Architecture, and kind of keeps his fingers on the pulse of Crunchbase. So super helpful to have this kind of data. Now, on the right side are all the InCommon catalysts that Internet 2 works with to sort of provide support, bridging mechanisms between, say, Active Directory or Azure and InCommon, or they'll provide hosting services. So these are companies that are essentially, some of them have sprung up specifically to support things like federation and identity and higher education, but they're all kind of driven towards the academic mission, and they're all kind of support organizations around the InCommon identity space. So they provide support for the trusted access platform. They'll provide integration support. So we have a lot more options in the corporate space as well, even to support the research and education specific identity use cases. And that's really exciting. So this is just a kind of a quick slide to kind of show you what kind of churn there is in the corporate landscape. Fortunately, we've been around for 20 years and our software's been around for almost that long. So the churn, at least in this open source area, is very low. But evidently in the corporate space, it's pretty high. So here's one example of one company and the amount of funding they have raised over the last, since 2009 to 2023. And it is astounding. It's mind-boggling. So clearly we can't compete with that, nor do we even try. Just wanted to throw this out there. So, but InCommon has changed too. So you'll notice that arrow, that's where we were in 2009. And you'll notice in 2022, at the end of the year, we were at 1029. So over 1,000 organizations. So we have gone almost an order of magnitude towards, growth for us. So quite a different look now. The other thing that we have changed since 2009 is we are now international. So we have international federation that's available. You can sit in University of Iowa and actually access services over in Switzerland or Mali. So it's very, very different scope in terms of capability for research and collaboration in particular. And you'll notice the numbers have changed quite a bit. Can you imagine 5,000 identity providers around the world? You'll notice in InCommon, we actually have more service providers than what's available internationally. And that's because we have a number of service providers that are just scoped to the United States. That's great. But just interesting service provider differences there. So other things that are new since 2009. This is a bit of a logo slide. Some of them are federation-specific policies, like InCommon baseline expectations and certify, which is federated incident response. We have InCommon collaboration success and InCommon Academy. So those are consulting and training to help you get going. InCommon Catalyst, these are companies that again help you support the research and education IAM ecosystem. Common Trusted Access Platform, that name is new, but co-manage had not been released by then, and Ben Oshrin can correct me if I'm wrong there. And we had not identified midpoint at that point. And common certificates service hadn't been implemented. So a lot has happened since 2009. So it's a really good time to look at the NECT Futures report and to explore where should we be going as a community. Where's the industry going? Where's the corporate side going? And what kind of capabilities do we need to enable together to support the academic mission? So Mark, why is this important?
So I'll just, before I kind of go onto the slide, I'll just do a quick minute or two of background here. It was about a year ago that Kevin and I were both at one of the first kind of coming back from COVID meetings. We kind of started talking about all this, and he, we were doing the Internet 2 strategic planning process, and I'm like, how come we haven't done anything like this for InCommon? He said, well, there was a futures report a while back. I said, there was already one of these, and then I started getting really excited because I think there's a lot of there's kind of a roadmap from before, and there's a lot of stuff that we have opportunity to pursue at this point. So that's kind of the background and kind of where things kind of got rolling about a year ago. So and to me, this is really important, primarily because I think identity services are really the most important thing we do in higher education. It makes everything coherent. It brings coherence to all of the other services we provide. It knits them together, and it makes, this is probably the single thing that is most important in providing a uniform experience to people when they join, when they leave, when they move around in the institution. Also, this is talked about a lot. There's a lot of really important security aspects here. And also some risk management. And last, I think, why is this important for us to be looking at is because I think we're unlike any other sector. We have so many weird edge cases in higher education, and some of the things that we need to do just are not on the radar screen of vendors. We're not, front and center for them. So I think doing this, working on this and talking about this amongst ourselves in our community is really important, because we're going to have needs that just aren't going to get met elsewhere. Next slide. Okay, so I think we missed one. There we go. Okay, so I just next few slides are kind of a call to action, and this is Kevin and I kind of did this at Internet 2 meeting last week, and I'm just kind of thinking. I was kind of thinking through, like, this is a little more specificity on why it's important. This is kind of like why it's important to me. So, and the things I'd like to see as an outcome, I'd like to see permissions frameworks for individuals be consistently implemented across all university offered services. I think we are pretty good. We do a lot of the services, but we aren't at the point of all. I would like to see permission frameworks for individuals be centrally managed and auditable. We're not there. And I'd like to kind of have all of that together so we can kind of have institutional knowledge of who has access to what services, and potentially even have that looked at by a third party. I'd like these permissions to change dynamically. I mean, one thing that's always a challenge is somebody switches jobs in the university and they carry their permissions with them, even though they shouldn't. So I'd love for that to just change dynamically and automatically. And I would really like, when I'm thinking about my own campus, I would like whatever approaches we're going to be taking to be normalized to the greatest extent possible across higher education. So we're not so far out of step. I think that, you know, when we are more as a community in lockstep together, we have a lot less individual risk. We have a lot more knowledge sharing. There are a lot of community benefits that we can take advantage of. Like this session right here today is a good example of kind of a community benefit. And the more we're doing stuff together, the more of these things help serve us all. Next slide. Wrong direction. There we go. So thinking of you know, just what I would like for our community, I would like greater participation in the InCommon Federation, both institutions and vendors. I would like to see greater uptake of Internet 2 trust and identity tools, and I want to see the bar to be lowered for operating these trust and identity tools to the greatest extent possible. So we really have a pretty diverse group of institutions in InCommon, but I think we can do better. I think there's a lot of benefit. I'll say in North Dakota, we've had a grant to do work with we have 5 tribal colleges in the state. And, you know, I would like to see this be easy for them to run and get greater adoption there, because that really helps us to be able to collaborate with them more. I think we have technical barriers to being able to collaborate, and the more that these tools are adopted, the better. Next. Okay, so, you know, some of what I want from our community, I would like to have others be contributing to the list of wants. So just as illustrating this, after the presenting this at Internet 2 last week, I had somebody in the audience kind of come up and visit with me afterwards, and they were doing a lot. They were working on some really interesting stuff that I'm like, when I heard about it, like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I would like to be able to do that. So I think that this is the level of maturity on our trust and identity tools. We really have a long way to go before this is kind of getting settled. There's just so much opportunity for us to do so many things that are really going to make life easier, improve security, just do all sorts of stuff. And bringing others to the table to get, you know, lists of like, I want to do this, I want to do that. That's really important, I think. Also then to prioritize these list of wants, because I think that, you know, communally, we kind of have to figure out what we're going to do. We don't have unlimited time and energy. We didn't have all the money that Ann was showing on that other slide, like the $1 billion investment. We're probably not going to get there. We're going to have to prioritize. And I'm really interested in participation from as many people in some level in this process. So just being here is one part of participating. If you have questions or comments that we could take here today, that would be very helpful as well. And you know, we've got a whole process where we're going to be working with other groups to get feedback and stuff, but the more participation, the better. Do I have one more, or was that my last slide? Let's go to the next one. I think that was my last slide.
I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Evidently, I can't handle the slides, so just thanks for your patience, Mark. So, yeah, this is super exciting for me, and I think a lot of it is because it gives us collectively the time to step back and kind of talk through what are we seeing as a community in the next 5 years, and what are the things that, as I mentioned earlier, what are the types of capabilities that we need to enable? I think at the community exchange last week, very much hearing kind of a general outsourcing of authentication, right? So what does that mean longer term? And what does outsourcing the authentication pieces mean? You know, it may be to Azure, but it may be to another organization leveraging social credentials. Some have actually talked about that. So these are the types of questions longer term that, you know, as a community and as Internet 2 as an enabler, I think we can start teasing apart and setting up a direction. So I think the key pieces are whom do we speak, with whom do we speak? So on the left side, we've started listing out the types of organizations we want to engage. On the right side are the individuals at those organizations. So, this is just our first essentially drafted this, and we'll be working, as Kevin mentioned, or Mark mentioned, with a third party consultant to kind of help us refine these things. But just to give you an idea of the types of organizations we're looking at. And then we've put together quite an extensive list of guiding principles to make sure that we're not only coming out the other side with this great paper and this great thing that hopefully we'll be using in planning and engaging you all and working with you on then gathering requirements. Once we have the direction, we want to make sure the process is as open and engaging as we can make it, as well as then making sure that we're not overlooking what's going on in the data. And that's one of the reasons why we're engaging a third party, is once we gather all the information, that we have someone else besides us look at it, so that we're not taking our biases and looking at this data and saying, oh yeah, that looks fine, we don't need to do anything there, or missing a really great opportunity that you all are telling us, but it's not real clear to us, but it might be clear to a third party. So I think the third party is going to be really, really helpful to enable us to hit the right tone. So next steps, we are again engaging, working with the third party and figuring out the final design of how we will be engaging you all, and you'll probably start seeing things in summer around a survey, as well as other engagement opportunities. So as Mark said, hope you can participate. And I think back to you, Kevin.
Great. Thanks, Anne. We've got a couple of open questions in the Q&A that I'll get to in just a moment. But I have a question of my own to ask of both of you. And the first one is from the perspective of representatives of the InCommon Futures 2 project. So in the 2009 report, it was very clear who the audience was, right? It was Internet 2 and the Internet 2 Board of Trustees, making a kind of community-centric business case for investment. And I think by any measure, the investment has borne out. I think the board made the right decisions. I think Internet 2 made the right decisions. Who do you think the audience is for the second report 13 years later?
You're not starting out with a softball, are you?
Well,
I think it's very complicated. I mean, so I think the diversity of the community and all these vendors, I mean, it's a complicated community, and I've been on steering for I think about 3 years now, and it's just been I've been gradually appreciating the complexity of this. So I would say the community, probably for me, the kind of the main people I would want to reach with this are individuals and institutions who want to participate and use the tools and advance them. That's kind of the main thing. I don't know that it's people who want to get in and participate in the process beyond the futures report, even potentially, which is a whole group of people. Like we have that earlier chart with all the different groups that are active. So that's kind of what I would say, at least to start with. And I think we'll probably discern that as part of the process goes on too a little bit. Anne will have a better
but before I editorialize, Anne, who do you think the audiences are?
It's really, I mean, I'm hesitating because I can say it right off the cuff, but I'm not sure. I would say it's really Internet 2 and the community. So it's Internet 2 and the anchor tenants like federal government, it's the funding agencies, it's the higher education participants, it's also to some extent our corporate partners, the ones that support us and support you in the actual work that we have to do together. So if you're thinking, I guess what I look at it is, we're trying to look at the academic mission in 5 years or more. Where does that need to be, and what are the things that are going to be important? I think Mark, you've talked about passwordless authentication. So there's lots of ways of handling that. One of the ways is leveraging mobile, right? What's the goal? What do we need to do with respect to mobile? I'm guessing that mobile is going to be a really big part of what happens with respect to enabling authentication. Well, we don't have a lot going there. So, I don't want to kind of lead the witness and lead the report or anything like that. I'm just giving an example of the types of things that we need to collectively figure out. What is it, where are things going, and then what is it that Internet 2 can do and should do, because the vendors are not going to do it. And again, it's not the competing part, it's trying to figure out those gaps. And so I say the audience is really, in particular, higher education and research and Internet 2. Everyone. It sounds like everyone.
Well, your answers, for me at least, scratch an important itch, and Mark led with it, and it's the complexity of the environment. One of the things I love about my job, and also prevents me from sleeping many hours during the week, is the complexity. In 2009, it was a lot simpler. It wasn't so much, I mean, it had complexity, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't so much about the complexity as it was about all the areas into which the set of activities could grow. And then when I look at the slides that Anne presented about different kinds of growth and different kinds of changes, that all happened, right? We had an expansion, our universe expanded. And as a result, everything just got more complex, including the audiences here. And you guys are the presenters, but the one thing, listening to you present, because like last week I was on the other side of this, and being an audience member this time, I'm drawn back to sort of a target diagram where we have the center here is kind of like InCommon's steering, right? Because steering's having this awakening and says, oh, it's been 13 years since we've done this. And so steering is paying acute attention to this. And then a circle that isn't that much larger than that one are all the people that serve on the advisory committees that Anne presented in that really busy kind of flow charty diagram. And that's about 100 people who are paying a lot of attention, thousands of hours of attention every year. And as we expand that circle, right, we can go out to the InCommon participants, or the certificate service subscribers, or the Eduroam subscribers, for example. They're paying attention because the service needs to work, and they're constantly giving us feedback. The bigger circle there, I think, is the real challenge for this project, is how do we hear from the people that aren't steering, that aren't on the current advisory bodies, that aren't participants or subscribers to the current set of services. And this is, I'm riffing off of something that came up last week. So I think we have at least those 4 audiences. And then, as Anne said, it's 3-dimensional, right? So you can take those 4 audiences, and then you can go in an industry direction, you can go in a federal government perspective, you can go in a dimension, and you can go in a vendor dimension, right? So it's got those circles, which are really kind of spheres, and you can go in any one, radially out from those kinds of things. So I want to draw attention to the 2 questions that I tried to answer in the Q&A. One was from Mark Rank from Cirrus Identity, one of the participants in one of our advisory bodies, one of our passionate community leaders. I hope I answered that question, Mark. I think your question was around the relationship between Internet 2 members and InCommon participants. And so there is a relationship. Almost all Internet 2 members are subscribers to the services that you articulated in your questions, certs, federation, and eduroam. And there can be a financial difference, right? So Internet 2 members get a discount for in the certificate service context. Eduroam is an entitlement for Internet 2 members in the eduroam context, but the federation fees, there is no differentiation, for example. And I think, Tommy, I hope I answered your question about Grouper's absence on the logo wall slide. That slide was meant to demonstrate just how much has changed at InCommon since 2009. David, I'm gonna put your question second to the anonymous attendee's question about the certificate service, and I was going to invite Anne to weigh in on some of the things that are going on specific to the certificate service. It will the certificate service is undoubtedly in scope for the Futures 2 effort, but there are some specific things going on with the cert service that I think Anne is real well positioned to address. Anne?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Can
the participants see the question? Well, maybe we should read the question.
Good question, Mark. Let's assume not. So the question is, I'd like to see a fit for purpose review of the certificate service instead of running the service as status quo or taking what Sectigo decides we need. Many of the requests I've made are unactionable due to the impact it might make to the rest of the subscribers, yet the subscribers would benefit from the proposed changes. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, it's a really good question. If those of you are aware, the InCommon certificate service is essentially rebranded partially. It's a rebranded Sectigo certificate service. And with a little bit different business pieces, we have a different configuration than the out of the box one. The good news is that Sectigo has, if you've gone on their site recently, they have a lot of connectors out the back end, integration options with like HashiCorp Vault and ServiceNow, and I believe AWS and so forth. And they have a really interesting kind of upfront control of access using AD into the cert service. So there's a lot of ways of kind of looking at that service as just a jumping off point and integration points into other things. They also are doing some really creative things with the software and the portal itself, and are quickly becoming a software company in addition to a certificate authority. You also probably know that there are many changes in the CA browser forum in terms of shortening certificate lifetimes or lengths, and automation is a huge thing. And so we do support Acme now, but I know that, again, others are looking to have integration in things like ServiceNow to support automation in a different way. So with respect to that, we're actually, and I'll say this unofficially to 66 of my closest friends, we are unofficially spinning up a community group to review essentially what Sectigo has, what we have, and kind of decide kind of how we want to structure next going forward, because there's a ton of different add-ons that they have that are difficult for us to do with our current service. And it's highly likely we're going to come out in later this year or early next year with some alternatives with respect to the offering. At this point, we're not looking beyond Sectigo as the provider of the service. If you're interested in knowing why, I'm happy to talk about that. Just email me awest@internet2.edu and we can get on a phone call. I can talk through that with you. But yeah, it is a challenge. We know that you all are interested in these additional features and working with Sectigo to figure out how to make it happen. IoT is another one that some folks have talked about. And I hope that answers your question?
Thanks, Ann. It satisfied a lot of the itches I have from such a question. I see that you and Mark are both addressing questions, but I'm going to take them on as well. And oh, okay, Mark said agree. I have more work. Surprise, surprise. I have more to say about it. It's Clay Cooper's comment about. Well, I'll just read it. Education IAM is different from corporate with research, faculty, nuances, alumni, and other loosely affiliated persons. It would be helpful to have frameworks covering best practices or a way to standardize describing IAM processes and practices to make it easier to compare across organizations in the same way security has HECVAT, SOC, et cetera. I don't know if April, who was our hostess today, could dig it up, but after Basecamp last year, Basecamp is one of the new things since 2009 and had a logo in there. It's one of our new events. One of the things that part of the curriculum of Basecamp is precisely this. There's a sort of a reference architecture for, what IAM looks like in higher education. And we spend a lot of time over Basecamp drawing lines from practices and practitioners back to that reference architecture so that attendees can assess for themselves where their gaps are or where it is they might need to strengthen their IAM infrastructure. So I would say, Clay, that we have a little bit of we do have a reference architecture, but it doesn't get to the rigor of something like HECVAT, for example. HECVAT's a very different kind of assessment tool. But I do think that maybe we could do some work coming, it could be revealed in the futures 2 effort to tighten up that reference architecture. So much more to say there. Our colleagues in Europe have done really good work in reference architecture kind of work that has driven research IAM infrastructures in a really positive direction, not only for Europe, but for the whole world as well. One of the open questions here, Anne was starting to type an answer to David Elena, if I hope I've pronounced your name right, David. Could you speak to the identity automation system, its capabilities, syncing with Active Directory? Can it provision accounts in Office 365 and sync with Google? For me, that's particularly how little I know in terms of implementation. That's a very specific question. My answer to it is a little probably oblique to what you're looking for, David, but we are being intentional about shifting how it is that we design things like Basecamp to assume that universities and organizations are deploying Active Directory, Azure AD, other commercial products that showed up in Ann's slide. We're making the assumption that that's a big part of your infrastructure and emphasizing more about how the InCommon tools and InCommon infrastructure play in that ecosystem. In 2009 was very different. Those things didn't exist. The curriculum needed to be different then, and we are being intentional about its change now.
Kevin, one thing to follow up on that, I think the answer is yes to all of those questions, but I also think there's potentially more than one way to do it. For each of those, and that might be a moment to plug the Catalyst program too. I think so that some institutions will want to do things like that on their own and do the, put in the plumbing, but there's also other resources available.
So Steve Zoppi, our colleague at Internet 2, Steve, Ann, and I are thick as thieves when it comes to all things InCommon at Internet 2. Steve's made the comment that I think it was Clay's question. This was the subject of much discussion within the component architecture team. So that's one of the bubbles in the flow chart of advising and governance for InCommon. This was the subject of much discussion with the component architecture teams. The approach to thinking about IAM in higher education and research as having a reference architecture is being deprecated. We had an anonymous attendee just ask a question. Do you know if Microsoft one day will be federation friendly, compatible with InCommon, allowing for Azure to bypass bridges or proxies / hacks, losing some security and trust that InCommon or independent host federations provide? Anne is not that far away from me, actually, but I can see her drooling to answer this question. At least I anticipate that. Anne, what do you have to say about Microsoft's Federation friendliness today?
Yeah, so they released, I think it was in March or April, some knowledge-based articles. There are multiple of them around supporting multilateral federations. So if you go to their site, their knowledge-based site, you'll be able to find essentially their use cases for how to support or their solutions. And I think there's 3 or 4, I can't remember. If Albert's on the webinar, he can let us know, or I can post the link after I finish answering the question. And they walk through the multiple ways, including a shibboleth proxy. There's also the Cirrus Bridge, which will bridge between Azure and InCommon. And Mark Rank can probably on this webinar give you information there. And there, I believe there's another one as well. So they are well aware of the organization's needs to broker Azure into InCommon. In particular, I think this work was driven by the National Institutes of Health announcement in 2020 of using it InCommon as a way of both accelerating pandemic research by enabling broader groups of individuals being able to access NIH services, but then also as a way of accessing ERA, so their grants administration system. So yeah, check it out. I'll dig it up and throw it in the chat if someone hasn't done it already. Oh, and April's done it already. So thank you.
That's fabulous. Thanks, Anne. So with about 7 minutes left, and I know April is going to want to wrap us up here pretty quickly, I have a non-binding final question to ask of you both. And by non-binding, I mean, I'd ask you not to answer it from the perspective of your role in the Futures 2 project, but rather just your point of view, right? Mark being a CIO on a campus, and Anne having been a multi-decadal contributor to all these spaces. So again, sitting on the other side of the transom of this material, I'm struck by the nature of change since 2009. I think I could make the case that it's all about growth. We're doing more things for more people. Right, we got the slide, the bar chart of participants, right? It's an order of magnitude growth. We have all these new services and all these capabilities. So since the last report, it's been arguably all about growth. I don't think that, I won't ask you either of you to weigh in on what the next 13 years looks like, but maybe a 5 to 7 year. Do you think that the impact of the report will net growth, change of existing programs? The answer is probably both, but I'm just curious. I think we were thinking about this in terms of growing in 2009. Do you have any expectations for what we might parse as signal from this activity?
No easy questions from Kevin today, I think. I mean, there are places where I would, if you talk about growth in terms of number of institutions participating or number of people from institutions participating, I think there's some room for that. And I know I would like to see it. I mentioned like our participation with tribals. I don't think none of our tribals in the state of North Dakota are, and I don't know if any tribal colleges in the country are participating in InCommon right now. But I think there is room for growth in that sense. But I mean, to me, I think, you know, a lot of this is intensification of use of these and finding utility for them and building more stuff out. So if I'm looking at just, what the numbers look, just kind of the raw numbers that were on one of the slides from 2009 versus today, I don't know if measuring it the same way, we would see the same kind of growth. I don't know. That's my off the cuff thought. I don't know that that's necessarily a measure of success either for the project, so.
Anne?
Yeah, I agree. I think some of this is growth. It's making it easier to do and easier to do well. And I think that will drive additional minds, right? Additional adoption, additional folks to join. Like you talk about, Mark, I think that is really important, but I think to get there, we have to make it easier. You know, if you think of the Rogers adoption curve, there's usually these kind of capability gaps that you have to jump in order to achieve the next level of adoption. And I think we're at one of those capability gaps where the organizations that have the resources and the knowledge and so forth to adopt things like InCommon Federation as it is, we may have maxed that out. And in order to get to the next group of folks to then diversify, as you're talking about, we have to institute some or figure out how to support these additional schools that need more support. And that may not be necessarily Internet 2 doing that directly. It may be Internet 2 working with the corporate providers to say, you know, this is a good housekeeping seal of approval. This is a company that is supporting the community standards that you all have already identified and is doing the right thing. And so it's sort of like an business relationships in addition to technology and standard setting. So it's an interesting, I don't know if it's going to go that way, but clearly in order to achieve your vision, Mark, we need to make it easier. So that's a huge piece of what's next, I think.
Well, I hope I hope everybody was listening to your answers, because I think they were really good, given that we haven't even formally kicked the project off. Before handing it back to April for wrap up, I do want to draw attention to two things. We will be doing some things like this as the project gets kicked off at various junctures. And in fact, one that Mark has already signed us up for is that at the Internet 2 Technology Exchange event in September, we're already signed up for doing an update on the project. So you can track us at Technology Exchange or at places like this Zoom webinar in the future. So with that, I want to thank Mark and Anne for making time yet again to talk about what is undoubtedly going to be a super impactful project. Grateful for InCommon Steering's courage and leadership to kick this off. It's overdue in a way. So thank you both. And with that, I'll hand it back to April for wrap up.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that very much. Many thanks to Kevin, Ann, and Mark for a great presentation and an engaging discussion around InCommon Futures 2. And our thanks to all of you who attended, posted questions, or just listened in. We appreciate you being here. Also, special thanks to Susan Yvette and the rest of our events team for helping us make IAM Online possible every month. Before we sign off, just a couple of last housekeeping items. Thoughts about today's program. We do have a quick 4-question survey. If as you leave, you could provide input, we'd appreciate it. If you have general feedback about IAM Online, you can certainly get in touch with me, April Motley, at amotley@internet2.edu. And we also hope that you will join us back here next month for another installment of IAM Online. So we will see you then. Until then, if you have ideas, there is a form on our website that you can use to submit your ideas for future installments of IAM Online webinars. With that, thank you again. And we hope to see you in June for IAM Online. Have a great rest of this day.
Thanks, everybody.